Okay, we're back in our environment, so let's go ahead and play this Star Wars mock. Click here under unknown sources. Okay, so here's our environment. We have our four items that you said you need. The we have the sword, we have our capsule, we have our spear, and we have our block. So let's say if I'm pointing to the block, see it's already showing I picked it up. So I grab, if I aim both of them, I can pull it toward me like I'm using the force. So that was part of the another script. So if I hit the trigger button both hands, I'm just tossing it. I can also throw it away. I can actually also grab another item, let's say the spear. Let's try the capsule. Pull it toward me. Grab. If I double click the If I double click on the trigger button in the right hand, this is where it shows up. If I double click on the right trigger, that's where it shows up. That's what happens. So I can let it go. Now let's try to aim for the sword. So if I aim for the sword, both double, I can drop both of them together. Looks like I'm using the force. When it comes close, I can actually grab the sword in my hand. See, it's in my hand correctly, and I'm holding it. Now, let's say it's in my right hand. So if I hit A, there you go. My sword has been activated, and I can actually hit some of my uh, uh, other objects. Put it back here. You see there, it's actually interacting with my sword. And if I wanted to shut it off, it's actually close back into my hand. Okay, I grabbed it on my left hand. But if I want to shut off the lightsaber, I still would have to use the right hand controller and hit B. You see, it's shut off. Turn it on, shut it off. So I can also drop it. So let's exit out of here using the menu button, and we quit the program. So go back to Unity editor. Okay, so that was a quick demonstration on how the lightsaber on and off works. But let me quickly show you how we got the grabbing to work. It's very similar to how we turn on and off the lightsaber. The grabbing, we had to use a different input system. So let me go ahead and open that input system. So this time I created a new one called Jedi. So let's do that. Open this one up. Okay. So I created a new input system for the Jedi, the player. And I created an action map player. And I created, from this action map, I created 4 different actions. One to create lightning effects, one to hover, one to grab, and one to release. So all of these are going to be similarly activated by a button. So again, when we press a button, the only difference is on the hover, the grab, and the release. In addition of using action type, we had a button, but we use interactions to differentiate between the two. So every time I hit one time, so I use grip, the left hand and the right hand. So we have, for hovering, I use the left and right hand, so depending on which one I have it under, we have the left hand controller, and we have what's called an interaction. So every time the left hand or the right hand here's a tap, it's gonna do this hover action. Every time we do a grab, we're gonna do the grip press for the right and left as well, but it's gonna use a multi-tap interaction. So anytime I do a multi-tap, I'm gonna actually grab it in my hand. And then finally, we do release. So again, either left or right hand controller. For these, we have a triple tap. So the interaction, every time I hit it 3 times, we're going to release the object. So let's go and quickly see what the script for that actually looks like. Very similar to the lightsaber. So the script will be under player attacks. So pretty much the same libraries we used for the lightsaber, pretty much the same input action, the same public input action asset. And these are all, you're still getting the left interactor, right interactor. So this is coming from the rays, and these are X-ray direct interactors, right hand and left hand. These are coming from the actual hand. So the hand has direct interactors, while the ray has a X-ray interactor components. So here's some float values, a hover height, hover speed, hover range. So we need these when we are hovering the object above our ray. And we have a force multiplier, so we call it 4F when we actually release it. So what we did is, in start method, we wanted to define all of these: the left ray interactor, right ray interactor, left hand director interactor, and right hand. So we did this through a for each method. We loop through each of the children for this game object. So in other words, we're in XR origin. So this is where player attack script is found. So we're looping through the children to find the left hand controller, the right hand controller, and from there we need the direct interactor as well as the corresponding ray interactors. So that's how we define each of those things. Again, in Awake, we had to find the player action map player, which is this one. So player action map is called player. And from that player action, we found these actions, the creating the lightning, hover effects, the grab, and the release. So again, to use the action method performed. So for example, the hover for the grab, let's take one of these for example. So when we perform the grab object, when we double clicked, then we call this method grab object, and then we enable that action. So grab object again has the input action callback context as an argument, because it has information that we need to interpret the interaction. So we had to verify here if context.action.name is equal to grab. So we go back here, we have to make sure that this is called. Okay, so if that is called, if we double clicked it, then we want to find out if the ray actually hit something. So if we're actually touching something. So that's where we did if left ray interactor or the right ray interactor gets a raycast hit. And from this out hit, we get information what the ray was actually colliding with. So when we use that to get the game object of the thing that was collided, for example, the sword, the spear, the cylinder, etc., the capsule, all those objects. So we're getting the game objects of those things. And then once we got the game objects, what we want from them is the XR grab interactable. So going back to Unity. So let's say, for example, the cube. The cube contains actually it has this component, XR grab interactable. So this is what we want, because we want to be able to use these interactable events. So we got XR grab interactable, and what we want is once we have selected that object, like for the right hand or the left hand, if we entered it and entered the game object, we selected it, we want to call this method selected. So we have an add listener to listen to whenever we intersect it with that object. So what that does is we're going to go to the selected. So private void selected. So this select entered is actually, so if we go back to left hand controller, so we're actually tapping into this interactor event. Select entered event args as a parameter. So we could plug in from here, but this is the way to do it if you're doing straight code. So if you're doing straight code, left grab interactable dot selected enter. This line is similar to adding a new select entered event and then finding that method. So there we have to have a method on a script to locate it. But we don't need to do that because this line is basically doing the same thing. So what selected method does is so this select event enter event args. So this args argument has information about what object has been interacted, which object has been selected, which object is doing the selecting. So but what we want is the object that was selected. So that's why I did args.interactable object. What do we want from it? We want the transform.position. We want the current position of that object that we picked, because we want to make it move toward us. So we're implementing the force. So the effect that you saw, that the object floating toward us when both beams are pulling toward us while we're holding both the grip buttons, that is done with this line using a vector3.lerp. So we have vector3.lerp uses 3 arguments. The current position of that object, so using the args argument, args.interactable object that transform that position to go. This is the final position. Transform that position, the final position, and some time factors, or time dot delta time dot hover speed. So time dot delta time is the interval in seconds from the last frame to the current one. So we use the built-in time dot delta time, and we multiply that by the hover speed, how fast it should come toward us. So that is a public float value that we labeled up here. So we can make it even faster or slower by changing this value here. So once that is done, once we have moved the object, we can now say that if it's close to the left ray interactor, we can turn on this use force grab and set it to true, or the right ray interactor to use force grab. So where this is located is, if we look at our interactors, so right ray interactors, and within the X-ray interactor component, you'll see here force grab on both of them. Force grab, force grab. So what that force grab means, it's going to move the object to your hand rather than interacting with it at a distance. So that's how I was able to grab it in my hand, all those objects. So currently they're set to false initially, both of them. So but once it's selected, when it's close by, we can then now say we set it to true. Only during the time while it's interacting with the XR ray. And then we have the hover object, so you can look at that at your leisure, but the same idea. We're getting a raycast hit, and we're getting information about what the ray is touching. We get the game object of that, and again we're getting the XR grab interactable, because now instead of using select entered, we want hovered entered. So we are trying to hover inside take the ray and hover inside the object. So what this is doing, ray interactors. So now we're actually not doing this. We're actually doing here, hover entered. So as soon as we entered, this is the event that we're going to be activating. So again, so we want to, when we're doing the hover entered, we're getting a listener. So this listener is when that hovering, we're calling this method called hover. So hover method, so what that's doing is, okay, we're using this as an argument, hover enter event args, the argument. So again, from this argument, we're getting information about the interactable object. So whatever is touching the ray, we're getting that information. We're getting the transform position. We're getting the position. But what we're doing with that position, while it's hovering, while it's touching the ray, we're actually making it hover above the ray. So we do that by giving a direction, vector 3 dot up, so that is the y-axis. We're telling it, we're multiplying it by a hover height. So hover height, we defined the value here, hover height, so we can make it bigger or smaller. So right now we set it to 1 floor, so we can make it hover higher or lower. And then we are multiplying that by the cosine function here, the mathf dot cosine. So the parameters, we're utilizing the time dot time. So this is another built-in Unity function. So time dot time is the time from the beginning of this frame. So this current frame only. So we're using that and multiply it by the hover speed. So this hover speed is, again, labeled here, hover speed. So how fast it's actually hovering. And that's how we got that. So so that's how we handle the grabbing, the hovering, and all the forms. So the create lightning bolt, you can look at the script and see how we did that. But I went over the main stuff, like how we hover objects, how we actually grab them. And I did not do any release object because I didn't feel like we needed to. It was really not necessary, but if I wanted to, it would be very similar to what we did with the grab object and the hover object. So I hope this has been very informative and you like the program so far.